because it sounded so foreign, so final, and, part of me admitted, so fantastic. "I have to get to the House of Night." Mom jumped up, and for a second I thought she was actually going to save me. Then John put his arm around her shoulder, possessively. She looked up at him, and when she looked back at me, her eyes seemed almost sorry, but her words, typically, reflected only what John would want her to say. "Zoe, surely it wouldn't hurt anything if you spent just tonight at home." "Of course it wouldn't," John said to her. "I'm sure Dr. Asher will see the need for a house visit. With him here, she'll be perfectly fine." He patted her shoulder, pretended to be caring, but instead of sweet, he sounded slimy. I looked from him to my mom. They weren't going to let me leave. Not tonight, and maybe not ever, or at least not until I had to be hauled out by the paramedics. I suddenly understood that it wasn't just about this mark and the fact that my life had been totally changed. It was about control. If they let me go, somehow they lose. In Mom's case, I liked to think that she was afraid of losing me. I knew what John didn't want to lose. He didn't want to lose his precious authority and the illusion that we were the perfect little family. As Mom had already said, what would the neighbors think? What will people think at meeting on Sunday? John had to preserve the illusion, and if that meant allowing me to get really, really sick, well then, that was a price he was willing to pay. I wasn't willing to pay it, though. I guess it was time I took things into my own hands. After all, they were well manicured. "Fine," I said. "Call Dr. Asher. Start the prayer phone tree. But do you mind if I go lay down until everyone gets here?" I coughed again for good measure. "Of course not, honey," Mom said, looking obviously relieved. "A little rest will probably make you feel better." Then she moved away from John's possessive arm. She smiled and then hugged me. "Would you like me to get you some NyQuil?" "No, I'll be fine," I said, clinging to her for just a second, wishing so damn hard that it was 3 years ago and she was still mine, still on my side. Then I took a deep breath and stepped back. "I'll be fine," I repeated. She looked at me and nodded, telling me she was sorry the only way she could, with her eyes. I turned away from her and started to retreat to my bedroom. To my back, the step-loser said, "And why don't you do us all a favor and see if you can find some powder or something to cover up that thing on your forehead?" I didn't even pause. I just kept walking, and I wouldn't cry. "I'm going to remember this," I told myself sternly. "I'm going to remember how awful they made me feel today. So when I'm scared and alone and whatever else is going to happen to me starts to happen, I'm going to remember that nothing could be as bad as being stuck here. Nothing." Chapter 4. So I sat on my bed and coughed while I listened to my mom making a frantic call to our shrink's emergency line, followed quickly by another equally hysterical call that would activate the dreaded People of Faith prayer tree. Within 30 minutes, our house would begin to fill up with fat women and their beady-eyed pedophile husbands. They'd call me out to the family room. My mark would be considered a really big and embarrassing problem, so they'd probably anoint me with some crap that was sure to clog my pores and give me a cyclops-sized zit before laying their hands on me and praying. They'd ask God to help me stop being such an awful teenager and a problem to my parents. Oh, and the little matter of my mark needed to be cleared up too. If only it were that simple. I'd gladly make a deal with God to be a good kid versus changing school and species. I'd even take the geometry test. Well, okay, Maybe not the geometry test. But still, it's not like I'd asked to become a freak. This whole thing meant that I was going to have to leave, to start my life over somewhere I'd be the new kid, somewhere I didn't have any friends. I blinked hard, forcing myself not to cry. School was the only place I really felt at home anymore. My friends were my only family. I balled up my fists and squidged my face up to keep from crying. One step at a time. I'd just take this one step at a time. No way was I going to deal with clones of the step loser on top of everything else. And, as if the people of faith weren't bad enough, the horrid prayer session would be followed by an equally annoying session with Dr. Asher. He'd ask me a lot of questions about how this and that made me feel. Then he'd babble on and on about teenage anger and angst being normal, but that only I could choose how it would have an impact on my life, blah, blah. And since this was an emergency, he'd probably want me to draw something that represented my inner child or whatever. I definitely had to get out of there. Good thing I've always been the bad kid and was well prepared for a situation like this. Okay, I wasn't exactly thinking about escaping from my house so I could run off and join the vampires when I put a spare key to my car under the flower pot outside my window. I was just considering that I might want to sneak out and go to Kayla's house. Or if I really wanted to be bad, I might meet Heath at the park and make out. But then Heath started drinking, and I started to change into a vampire. Sometimes life doesn't make any sense. I grabbed my backpack, opened my window, and with an ease that said more about my sinful nature than the step loser's boring lectures, I popped out my window screen. I put on my sunglasses and peeked out. It was only 4:30 or so, and not dark yet, so I was really glad that our privacy fence hid me from our totally nosy neighbors. On this side of the house, the only other windows were to my sister's room, and she should still be at cheerleading practice. Hell must truly be freezing over, because for once I was sincerely glad my sister's world revolved around what she called the sport of cheer. I dropped my backpack out first, and then slowly followed it out the window, being careful not to make even a small oof noise when I landed on the grass. I paused there for way too many minutes, burying my face in my arms to muffle my horrible cough. Then I bent over and lifted up the edge of the pot that held the lavender plant Grandma Redbird had given me, and let my fingers find the hard metal of the key where it nestled against the smushed grass. The gate didn't even squeak when I cracked it open, and inched out like one of Charlie's angels. My cute bug was sitting there where she always sat, right in front of the third door to our 3-car garage. The step loser wouldn't let me park her inside because he said the lawnmower was more important. More important than a vintage VW? How? That didn't even make sense. Jeez, I just sounded like a guy. Since when did I care about the vintageness of my bug? I must really be changing. I looked both ways. Nothing. I sprinted for my bug, jumped in, put it in neutral, and was truly thankful that our driveway was ridiculously steep when my wonderful car rolled smoothly and silently into the street. From there it was easy to start it and zip out of the neighborhood of big, expensive houses. I didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. I did reach over and turn off my cell phone. I didn't want to talk to anyone. No, that wasn't exactly true. There was one person I really wanted to talk to. She was the one person in the world who I was positive wouldn't look at my mark and think I was a monster or a freak or a really awful person.